Magavanan and well met. I am Arachír Galudirithon, head of Divide and Conquer, and welcome to a faction overview video for Dol Guldur. Now, first few points of housekeeping. I do know that I said that I would do Rohan next, but fortunately, there have been some rather interesting changes to Dol Guldur in the modding side of the game, and I'm very eager to show these off, courtesy of our Lord Hummingbird here in. In addition to that, I really don't like Rohan, so I will do them, but I'll push them back. Secondly, last week I hoped to do 2 videos a day and then a video a day this week, but that is entirely unrealistic, and unfortunately, given that this is a mere hobby and my job in real life has recently kicked up, I shall be doing probably at most 2 a week, maybe more if I can squeeze the time in, but it's we shall see. So, I will aim to do the faction overview videos, and then when I get a bit more time at the weekends now, I may well continue the Let's Plays then. But, anyway, let's dive into Dol Guldur and ignore the boring real-life stuff. Dol Guldur, the city and the faction. They begin at the start of the game with the only one province, Dol Guldur. Hill of Sorcery, Hill of Witchcraft, call it what you like. Dol means hill. And Guldur is dark sorcery, or I think it actually means dark knowledge. Gul means knowledge, or like to know, or lore, or things like that. And Dur just means dark, yeah, dark. So it's kind of like dark knowledge, but it's twisted to mean dark sorcery. It's the same part of the word that you get from Barad-dûr, which just means dark tower. So that's where it gets the name from. But anyway, you only start with one town, Dol Guldur. You got quite a hefty garrison, which has actually quite good units. So you're not too low on the ground with units. You've also obviously got your 3 Ilairi generals, or Nazgul generals, headed up by Khamûl the Easterling, who has his own strategy model just there, based off of the armor of the Easterlings itself. And that's the start of the game for Dol Guldur. Very simple start. One province in the south of Mirkwood. Right, in terms of rebel expansion, it's a similar sort of story to Lorien, I'm afraid. I'm very uncertain as to why most of the villages and towns, as you can see from the map there, are actually shown up for Dol Guldur already. There must be something about a script must be related to that, but it shows you all those villages for some reason. But it doesn't actually show you them. They're just highlighted on the map, so you'll always know the name and whatnot. But anyway, so you can head south and take the small village of Araeinior, which is to your south. You can see it just there. You can head further south and take the lands between you and Mordor. There's a castle here called Dor Norhak, I believe, Dor Norhauch. And you can take that castle and stop Mordor pushing north. You can head to your east and take the small castle of Dor Ingvar in eastern Mirkwood there, and then beyond that, I believe there's a Burr something along the edge here. I want to say Burr south this, but I don't think it is. But there's another town just here, so you can push towards Dorwinion, and these are all rebel towns. Remember, I'm explaining where all the rebels are. You can indeed head north through Mirkwood itself, and you can take the central village of Ostingail. Brief point about Ostingail, just to big up my own ego. In the original Third Age Total War, this village was called Ostingiel, and it was spelt with an I-L, no E-I, which grammatically didn't make sense in Sindarin, because Ost-in-Gael means town of the stars. But Ost-in-Gil means town of the star, but it had an incorrect grammatical link in the word in. And for ages, basically part of the reason why I started modding was just to change that town's bloomin' name. So do take that town and remember that little story. And then head further north. You can take Enethauer in the centre of Mirkwood, and then you can head up towards Dale through Erunrunen, and then through Erunthóllen. But Mirkwood will then take Emyn Nufuin, so you won't be able to take Emyn Nufuin, which is the mountain town, and I'm fairly certain their expansion takes them to Erunthóllen actually, so you'll probably only be able to make it to Erunrunen, and then once you reach there, you're knocking on Dale's door, which leads you on quite nicely to who are your neighbours. But at the beginning of the game, you start allied to only one person, Sauron. Sauron the Great Betrayer. He is your ally. And he is your only ally, so you don't have any ties to the Misty Mountains. Obviously you have favourable connections to the Misty Mountains, so you're more likely to ally with all the evil factions, because that's how the game's set up. But your only actual ally is Mordor itself. And you are at war, if we bring that screen back up, with Anduin, who are to your northwest, Dwarves, who are to your far west, Galathrim, who are to your immediate west, Thranduil, who's to your immediate north, and the rebels. So you're currently not at war with Dale or Dorwinion, but they are both likely to be out for your blood. So do be cautious of that. Right, in terms of economy, you're an Orc faction, so you can't upgrade any of your castles, and you don't really get any particularly strong economical buildings. Also, you don't have any unique buildings, so whereas Isengard have the logging camp and things like that, you don't have anything like that. So your economy is average, medium to average. I mean, obviously, the more towns you have, the richer you'll be, and it doesn't matter if you're an economy-based faction, but you're not going to have as much money as Dorwinion and Dale will, for example. Especially Dorwinion, they're one of the biggest eco-factions in the game. Economical, not environmental. No, that didn't really make sense, did it? Because they call people eco when they're like eco-warriors. No, they get a lot of money. Let's just settle on that. Right, in terms of construction, as I've already mentioned, you're an Orc faction, so you can't upgrade any castles. So do be cautious that when you take Dor Lingvar, it will remain a wooden castle for the rest of the game. And the same with Dor Norhak, which is to your south. No, you won't be able to upgrade either of those, but you can take solace in the knowledge that your neighbours to the north and to the west also cannot upgrade their castles. So you're not going to have any big battles over castles. Other than that, you get standard Orc-style guilds, if we get the building browser up, which is just the Fighter's Pit. You get a Brawler's Pit, which increases your troop experience, and then a Brawler's Hall, which gives you more experience globally. And I believe that's the only guilds that you actually get. And so that's your construction. Now, in terms of scripts, the only script which affects Dol Guldur is the now very, very well implemented script by Geosthode, which is the Nazgul respawning script. So if your Nazgul are to die, they will come back. They will respawn at your capital after a certain amount of turns, and everyone in the world will get a message to say your Nazgul have respawned. And so you will always have your Nazgul generals. But one thing to note is that whilst Lord Khamûl the Easterling is your faction leader, and this is only because someone posted a comment about this regarding the Witch King, it's useful to know that when this Lord Khamûl dies, the replacement Lord Khamûl, whilst looking exactly the same, having the same stats, having the same ancillaries, having the same traits, is actually an entirely new character as far as your family tree is concerned. Now, obviously you don't have a family tree because you're Teutonic, but this new Lord Khamûl will not become your faction leader because he isn't the same Lord Khamûl as before. But given the ridiculously high authority that all the Easterlings have as standard, he is likely to make it up to become your faction leader once again. So do bear that in mind. But the Nazgul will respawn, and that's the script of Dol Guldur.
No sleeping here.
It's also worth mentioning that your victory conditions on a long campaign are to take 40 regions, and pretty much all of Mirkwood and the Vale of Anduin, and to defeat the Vale of Anduin, to defeat the elves of the Galathrim and the elves of Thranduil. You have to defeat the 3 people that start around you. But note that you don't have to defeat Dale, and you don't have to defeat Dorwinion. And those are your victory conditions. Now, in terms of tips for Dol Guldur, I'm very uncertain, I'm afraid, because I've never played with them in my life. So I would certainly suggest that you try and take out the elves quickly, because I know that of all the 4 elven factions, Lothlorien are the only ones who really ever do anything, and they cross the river in force if you leave them unchecked for quite some time. In addition, if you don't attack the Vale of Anduin, they will get the upper hand on the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, and then they will be a bit of an annoyance. Even though by the late stages of the game you do outclass the Vale of Anduin, they will throw just as many troops at you as you can throw at them, so you're quite evenly matched. So you do have to be cautious of them and try and deal with them if they become a threat. Alternatively, you can also head to your northeast and try and bring down Dale. However, that would just be a side quest, and I wouldn't recommend you set that as your goal, because then the Anduin forces and the Galathrim forces will all overpower your capital, which they start very near. Right, and that's all the Dol Guldur features on the campaign map. One thing I would just like to mention, which is courtesy of a YouTube user who I've totally forgotten the name of, and I apologise, but you should know exactly who you are, and that is the addition of this line here, where it says building costs reduced by X%. And that is entirely the addition or sorry, that is entirely thanks to this user who pointed out that we can write how much money is going to be reduced by certain buildings. So at the minute you can see that this is reducing your, although I need to tweak the numbers because it currently says it's reducing your costs by 20%, but this baluster maker is only 10% cheaper. So I need to tweak the numbers on that, which I will do today. I'll make a quick note of that. Tweak numbers. But anyway, so whereas before you never knew if a building recruit decreased your building costs, you now at least get told that your building costs are reduced. So thank you very, very much for that. The next thing, which you'll see a lot more in the, you will see an awful lot more in the next section of the video, but there's a little teaser of what is to come. Alright, so let's head over to the next side, and we'll talk about Dol Guldur on the battlefield. We're up against Thranduil. I believe I chose. Do excuse me, sorry. There's a rather nice drawing. Looks quite lifelike. Maybe it's a drawing of a real life picture. Oh no, down here it looks so really. That probably is a picture, to be honest. Oh well, who knows? Await my command. Alright, the astute watchers amongst you will already see some of the changes from the pictures down the bottom. But we will talk about the units when we arrive at them. First thing to note from the Dol Guldur forces is that, as you can see, you're not really a cavalry faction. You get 2 units of cavalry, and one of them is only available with your Nazgul. Otherwise, you just get Warg Riders. There they are. You get a unique type of Warg Rider, which I believe is from the bus mod, big unit submod, which we hope to add some more units from. I plan to do that this very day, actually. So it's a different type of rider than I believe is present for, say, Mordor or Isengard, but I can't remember if we used that one for everyone, so that might not be true by now. Also, you'll note that Dol Guldur do get trolls. And there they are, with green body paint on them. As I mentioned in a video where we were fighting against Dol Guldur, they don't actually have green growths on their body. That is a sort of war paint, as you can see from the design on their chests. To make them just look a bit disgusting, really. But anyway, let's move everyone over there and let's line everyone up. Now, as you're an Orc faction, you do get a unit position which is sub-militia. They're like worse than militia, if that's possible, in your Mirkwood Stalkers and Mirkwood Hunters. We'll group those up. Then next up, I believe, are the Maulers, who are a gift from Mordor. And the Uruk Archers, they're in your first tier, and Orc Raiders, you're in the first tier too. Group all those up. And then next up, Pikes, Blades, potentially the Bodyguard. Oh no, just the Pikes, the Blades, the standard Mirkwood Uruk host, and they're up next. Then your 4 elites, obviously at the very, very top with the Bodyguard. And so the question comes in: where do the Warg Riders fit in? Ah, they're about somewhere in the middle, just there. Alright, so those are the kind of a rough idea of what your what tiers your units have. You've got sub-militia, militia, medium, and elite. Not very many factions have sub-militia, or most factions, if they have 4 tiers, it's because they'll have an elite and then what I call an uber-elite, whereas with Mirkwood you've just got an elite, medium, militia, and sub-militia. So we'll start at the beginning with your 2 arrow fodder units, I like to call them. And the first of these are the Mirkwood Stalkers. Now these are the Mirkwood equivalent of Snagger Skirmishers and Snagger Warriors, or whatever they're called, Snagger something. And there's a large number of them, but as you can see they are terrible. 1 attack, 1 charge, 1 defense, which comes from their shield. So these guys will fall like there is no tomorrow. They've got poor morale response. We can use this as an opportunity to show that all Orcs get a bonus in forest and snow, but they don't fight as well in desert and grassland. But there are 250 of these, so you can at least throw them at the enemy and keep the enemy bogged down with these weaklings while your elites do the damage. And in the same sort of vein as that, you've got an archer equivalent, who actually are not too bad. I mean, they got 3 defense, bit more armor than their friends over there, and they've actually got a 2 melee and 2 missile and 2 charge. So these are a lot more useful than the Mirkwood Hunters, but understandably they'll be more expensive. There's also 50 less of them, so you won't be able to use them as much in battle, because there just aren't as many to choose from. Alright, so those are your first two sub-militia. Then you come to your first actual tier of units. Now included in this are the Mirkwood Uruk archers, who are a counterpart to the Mirkwood Uruk host, but as you can see from the stats, they are vastly inferior to their standard melee brethren, and that's because Uruks aren't particularly renowned for their archer skill. And they have to sacrifice certain defences in order to be able to equip their quiver and their actual bows. We'll start on the left with the Orc Raiders. These are your basic unit, again borrowed from Mordor. They're still not very good, as you can see. They may charge without orders, which is good though. It means that their morale response is actually quite good, even though their morale is terrible. So they won't be affected as much by shocks, but because their morale is so low, it doesn't take much to break them anyway. But they've only got a 4 defense, which 2 of that comes from their shield, so they're quite good. Well, they're terrible. They're just absolutely awful, but they can hold out against archers longer than many can. Their attack of 2, charge of 2, which is similar to the Mirkwood hunters, Mirkwood stalkers, who I am going to make a little note of on my little pad, so that will actually change. I didn't realise that we'd made the Mirkwood hunters have a 2 melee and a better defense. So these are going to, by the time you come to play, well, when you play this game, this is what they will all look like. But rest assured that in the next version, the Mirkwood hunters will also only have a 1 defense. The Mirkwood stalkers are going to have a 2 defense, because they're going to get a defense skill. The archers are going to have a defense skill but nothing else, and their melee is going to go down to 1, which makes their Orc Raiders actually stand out a little bit more. Right, next up are your Orc Maulers. Now these are very reliable even in this early tier because they are effective against armour. They've got a very good charge as well, so they can do an awful lot of damage in their initial attack. But then after that they're not as good because, as you can see, no shield, so arrows are going to bring them down. They've got a poor defense skill, but because their armour's only 4, they're not massively affected by armour piercing enemies, but because they've got barely any armour anyway, anyone can bring them down regardless of whether or not they're armour piercing. But their attack is 5, which is quite good. They're armour piercing themselves, and they have a charge of 6, so you want to charge them in and flank the enemy. But I've spoken of them before because, again, they are borrowed from Mordor. So these are the Dol Guldur's mainstream middle tier archers. Missile attack of 3, which is nothing to scoff at. I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to outshoot your elven counterparts. As we've seen from the 2 elven videos, the militia elves have a 8 missile, I believe, and your middle tier archers have a 3, so you're really outclassed in terms of archery, so don't go for that. They're reliable in snow, which is useful, and they're starting to get reasonably better morale and morale response now. It's on average, so the Uruk archers, whilst not being particularly good soldiers, they're going to survive a little longer in melee than perhaps the Orc Raiders will. Alright, and then we'll jump up to the next tier. We'll start with the Warg Riders because Warg Riders, I believe, I've already covered in the Isengard video, and all Warg Riders of all factions, I believe, have the same stats. They scare horses, which is always advantageous. They've got an attack of 10 and a charge of 10, so they're really good initially, really good initially, but with no shield and a high defense skill, they're very susceptible to arrow fire, very susceptible to arrow fire. And their armour is only 4, so they've not got much defense going for them once the arrows have stopped firing. So do be cautious with the Wargs. Right, the middle tier, or the upper tier as it were. No, sorry, middle tier, yeah. You've got Mirkwood Uruk host. Now we take a big jump in our stats here. These aren't the these are sort of the elites of this middle tier, so we will do those last actually. We'll start with the blades. Dol Guldur blades, who are down the other end. Who are in the middle, sorry. The Dol Guldur blades have an armor style borrowed from Mordor, but they are unique to Dol Guldur. They have large blades. They used to be called Blade Masters, but their stats didn't really match up to the master name, so we kind of did away with it, and they're now just Uruk blades, or Dol Guldur blades. And they have a very high attack of 8, which is very good for a melee middle tier unit. Their defense is 9, which is nothing to scoff at, and this time the bulk of that is made up of their armor, so not as susceptible to arrow fire. But given that obviously 5 of their defense goes when an arrow shoots them, they're not very susceptible to arrow fire because they've got a good armor of 4 and a shield of 3. Their low defense skill means that arrows aren't that effective against them. But their charge isn't very good, of only 3, so they're prolonged melee units, not charged melee units. Next up at this tier are the Dol Guldur pikes, your first anti-cavalry unit at all, actually, from your entire initial roster, save perhaps the wargs. These are just mainline pikes. They're exactly what you'd expect. They've got a good defense for pikes, which is very good, but do note that with no shield and a 6 defense skill, they're very susceptible to arrow fire. Their attack's only 4, but their charge is 5, so they're quite good when you stop using them defensively and attack as well. They're actually very good at hiding, so they're an ambush style unit too, and they've got morale, which is a good morale and a good morale response, so starting to get units who will hold their own. Obviously they're pikes as well, so when you have them in lines with the enemy coming from the front, they're virtually invulnerable. Right, and the final unit in the middle tier are the Mirkwood Uruk Host, who are just sort of standard Uruks but trained up slightly better than the Dol Guldur Blades. And the Mirkwood Uruk Host, who actually I think I'm going to swap DG Blades and Mirkwood Uruk Host. In 0.6 these two are going to be swapped around, so these are going to be your Dol Guldur Blades and these are going to be your Mirkwood Uruk Host, because these look far more heavily armoured and organised than these do, yet these are actually currently better in the stats. So I'm going to swap those around. But these have a 17 defense, so starting to actually be really good. These units are really dependable. We can really rely on them. Their attack is 8, which is the same as the Blades, but obviously with the higher defense. So that's also going to switch in the next one. But I'll stop saying which things that will swap in the next one because you can't play the next one yet. So that's just not worth talking about. They've got good morale and good morale response, the same as their counterparts there. Do note again, their defense skill of 5 means that arrows are going to be hitting them, make their defense only 12, but they've got a high shield and a very high armor, so they're very good against arrow fire. Right, and then we come to our final tier. We'll start with the two oddities on the far left. First is Uruk Bodyguard. Now, if your Nazgul Bodyguard will be Khamûl's mounted Shadow Guard, who we'll get to in a minute, but the Uruk Bodyguard are your standard bodyguard for everyone else, and again they're borrowed from Mordor. Their stats are very similar to the Mirkwood Uruk Host, only slightly better. So they essentially are the Mirkwood Uruk Host, but with less numbers. So they're not invincible, then by no means, by no stretch of the imagination. So you do have to be cautious when using these in battle, because they are not amazing units. They're not really elite style units. They are more like units down here. So do bear that in mind. Right, and also obviously you've got the trolls. Now Dol Guldur trolls are quite good. You have got 6 hit points, which is phenomenal. 31 defense initially anyway, but do note that with no shield and that 31 of that being made up of a 24 defense skill, you are basically just asking for these guys to die if you run into enemy arrow fire. Their attack is 32, which is very, very good, and their charge is 12. So obviously they're going to decimate the enemy in melee, but they are really weak to arrow fire, so really be careful when bringing them up against enemy archers. But otherwise they're trolls. I mean, you can't really talk much more about trolls. They can't hide, powerful charge, they frighten nearby enemy infantry, they're skilled against cavalry, so they're another cavalry killer, and their morale is very, very good with an impetuous. Their morale should also be locked. I'm fairly certain if I've recently went through and added locked to every unit which had locked morale, so I don't actually think these do have locked morale, but if they do, then I apologise, and it's just one that I've missed. I'll double check in a minute. Alright, and here we come to the 4 elites of Dol Guldur. Now the reason that I wanted to do Dol Guldur is because, as you can already see, these units have been edited by Hummingbird, and they no longer have the off, really weird texture that you will see if you play Dol Guldur in your game. So let me just stress that now, because we will get people saying, oh, your units look totally different to mine, have I installed the game wrong? No! These units are not available in version 0.51. Not available in 0.51. They will be available in whatever version we do next, be that 0.6 or 5.2, probably 0.6. I like to increase the number. So these units will not look like this in your current game, but they will look like this in future. So given that Khamûl is obviously an Easterling, that's a tested fact, we've done away with the idea that these might be dead ghost-like people who have come back from the death or whatever to fight with him, and in fact they are now just Easterlings who have come with Khamûl to Dol Guldur.
We wait for battle.
And as you can see, they've been given the evil men voices.
All will Perish.
The same voices as the
Black Rangers.
men of Rhudaur. I say Men of Rhudaur because those are the voices from Battle for Middle-earth 2, The Rise of the Witch King expansion pack, and they are the voices of the evil men of Kharndom. But anyway, so there are 3 units in this battalion, and then an extra ranger-style unit. So there's Khamûl's Shadow Guard, Khamûl's Mounted Shadow Guard, Khamûl's Shadow Bows, and Khamûl's Shadow Rangers. The Khamûl's Shadow Guard are the melee infantry unit. As you can see, they've got a very cool Easterling-style battle axe weapony thing. They inspire nearby troops, so they're going to give a bonus to all your troops around them. They have a defense of 23, which is very, very good, but do note with no shield and a 9 defense skill that their defense skill is essentially halved when being shot by arrows. Their attack is 9 and their charge is 7, so they're very, very vicious and they can survive a long time. They're also effective against armor, which makes these just killers of absolutely all of the elite units that they're going to come up against from, say, Thranduil and Lothlorien. So they are phenomenal units, and their strength speaks for itself. And they are the dismounted melee counterpart. As you can see, they have slightly different looks depending on whether they're mounted, dismounted, or if they are rangers, excuse me for the coughing, or shadow bows. So next we'll come to the Khamûl's Mounted Shadow Guard. Now these are sword wielding, as you can see, with distinctive Easterling armour.
They all must die.
They are the bodyguards of the Nazgul, but they are also trainable from your stables or your barracks. Can't remember which one. Very good morale response. They're obviously very heavily armoured. They're good against cavalry, which is good. Or they're not good against other horses, but they have a bonus versus camels and wargs, which is an interesting little addition if you wish to backstab your... well, all your allies, really, because camels and wargs are only owned by evil factions. So if you wish to do a number on the evil factions, these guys are going to help you out. But as you can see, they've got a 31 defense, this time backed up with a shield, which I believe is we haven't yet decided on what shield they're going to have. So stay tuned for the shield, but they will retain a shield, so they'll get a shield bonus. They have a 12 attack, which is incredible. No secondary attack, so that 12 attack is their attack. But they get a charge bonus of 7, which you'd expect of a cavalry style unit. And they have this unique horse called it's a unique horse that is only ridden by the bodyguards of the Nazgul. So if there's, because certain units, as you may have seen from other faction videos, have a bonus against the black mounts of the Illyri, and they are these horses. So do watch out for units who have a bonus expressly against these men. Right, we'll do the Shadow Bows next. The Shadow Bows are the armoured, non-hidden division of Khamûl's units, as a counterpart to the Shadow Rangers. Now the Shadow Bows are very, as you can see, a darkened, evil version of the Loknar something that the run units have. Now these guys, whilst being up here at the elite sort of section, aren't wildly elite. Their defense is only 13, which is similar to the middle tier units, if worse than the middle tier units in some places. But their melee is 5, which isn't too bad for an archer unit, but their missile attack is 5, which is good for an Orc faction archer unit. Obviously they're outdone in archery by the Shadow Rangers just next to them, but the Shadow Rangers are unique and a lot rarer. These are your mainstream elites, but the Shadow Bows, I believe, the Shadow Rangers can only be trained in Mirkwood, so you don't get as many Shadow Rangers. But the Shadow Bows and the charge of 3, so you're not going to really want to use these guys in melee, although they can fight in melee because they've got a reasonable melee attack. Right, and finally the Shadow Rangers. These guys just here. As you can see, they've got a better defense than the Shadow Bows. They've got a better melee, a better missile, but the same sort of charge. Now these can hide anywhere, which is very, very useful. And they have the same morale and the same morale response. Because they're rangers, their range is 220, very high accuracy with 32 missiles. Whereas the Shadow Bows only have 190 range. They're not as accurate and they have less missiles. So these are better all round, but to compensate for that, I believe they do cost more and they're far rarer because they do have recruitment restrictions. These are the ones you're likely to use all the time. And that is Dol Guldur's army. So let's line them all up and just get a shot of everyone fighting. I wonder what happens if you have trolls defensively. Should we see what comes of that? Clearly, as you can see as well, you do, even though you're not a true orc faction, well, you are. You're an orc faction, but you have one of the few orc factions who has an alternative unit type, which is humans in this case. You can see from the clips here, from the line down the bottom, that you only have 4 archers and only have 2 cavalry, and the cavalry are really rare. One of your archer units is really rare, so you are, like most other orc factions, melee heavy. So we'll turn all of those off. As you may have noticed, some of our archers were firing. We'll go and have a look at our shadow rangers, who are the ones firing. There they are. Simple yet heavy breastplate with the iron mask that is reminiscent of the Witch King, as opposed to the Easterling style mask and armour of the Shadow Bows. They're getting their shots off. We are up against Thranduil, however, so almost his entire army is probably shooting arrows at us, which means we may have to charge him, which we will happily oblige. We'll charge everyone in and then watch for a little bit, and then that'll be the end of this one. Are they charging? Did I tell them all just to charge? Yeah, I must have done. Some units getting stalled. The trolls are soon to hit. Line of woodland spearmen. Oof, absolute slaughter. How did the cavalry do? Oh, they hit the e-Hûdoll so hard. The e-Hûdoll, obviously, as I always say in almost every single video, they're the best archers in the game. But they do not have very good armour, so they are terrible once the enemy reaches them. And the rest of our units breaking through. Where are the shadow? There they are. They're awesome weapons. Slicing and dicing. Oh, it's armor piercing versus armor piercing. The e-Hûdoll are going to give the Shadow Guard a run for their money. But we shall go up down the line, and then that will be the end. So as usual, I do hope that you have enjoyed this video. I hope it's been informative. Do remember that the Shadow units will look different in your game temporarily. Do feel free to comment if you think the old look is better. Personally, I think that look is insane and looks really good, and it's really well done. But do comment if you wish. There's the hordes of orcs pushing in the back there. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them on YouTube, but it is easier on ModDB or Total War Center because YouTube has some weird comment restrictions, and there are quite a few people who I'm afraid I just can't reply to. YouTube just does not let me reply, and if anyone knows exactly why that is, from doing a bit of research, it seems that if you don't have a Google Plus account and you only have a YouTube account, it might be because of that. But I thought YouTube accounts were linked and you can't get one without the other, so who knows. But so do reply on Total War Center or ModDB if you have a burning or pressing question. Do flick through the forum at Total War Center or ModDB if you're having installation issues, because installation issues either the game will work and you've just done something wrong in the install, or for whatever reason your computer just will not play this mod, and that's it. But there aren't really any other quirks. There's not much more I can help you with, unfortunately. Wow, look how fast the Elder Council were. They were running so quickly. But anyway, so that is the end of the Dol Guldur video. Thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. Your support is much obliged. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see the rest of these faction videos or a few Let's Plays from myself. Obviously, once the faction videos are done, the Let's Plays will come on thick and fast, as they are shorter and easier to do. But for now, I'm Arachír Galudirithon. Thank you very much for watching, and until we speak again, Navar Naden Pedimad, and farewell.